One of the main problems with realizing that, for instance, NATO's geopolitics are dictated by the Jesuits resident at Georgetown University is that nobody believes us. Nobody believes the anti-Jesuit scholars. They think we're merely cranks because they believe, for instance, that the Rothschilds rule the world, or it's the Zionists, or it's the Illuminati. And indeed, to an extent, it is the Illuminati, but they try and split the Jesuits and the Illuminati, which is their biggest mistake, because the Illuminati are a constituent part of the Jesuit order. The world is dictated by the Jesuits, who are the CIA, the equivalent of the CIA for the ultra-aristocracy. The ultra-aristocracy that rule the world are genetically engineered and practice selective breeding in eugenics. But they don't only follow a scientific basis, they also follow a religious basis to it, as the divine right of aristocratic rule, and that feudalism is the divinely ordained system. And thus, we have Anglican clergymen like Malthus who are able to bridge the religious scientific divide, but still be saying the same thing. And indeed, the Jesuits, despite being in complete control of the Papacy since 1814, they keep the Catholic Church in the forefront of global geopolitics because they are aware that ultra-aristocratism, ultra-feudalism, and Ultra-Catholicism are all one in many ways. Indeed, they work together. A feudal system must have the Catholic Church, just as the ultra-aristocracy need a Catholic Church-style structure to rule. And the higher echelons of the Catholic Church and the Vatican are themselves of the bloodlines of the ultra-aristocracy, and they believe in the divine right of the hierarchical clergy to rule. Thus, the archbishops and anyone above the rank of archbishop in the Catholic Church is initiated into the Illuminati. The Illuminati that is completely entwined with Jesuitry. There is no division there, and that is what many supposed conspiracy theorists fall flat in. When they encounter that kind of information, they simply can't believe it, because they believe the Jesuits are merely this element existing on the fringes of Catholicism. They don't realize that the Jesuits are the Papacy. Since 1814, every pope has been a Jesuit puppet, because during the period between their suppression in 1773 and 1814 and 1815, the Jesuits were very busy. They were not only fomenting the French Revolution to destroy France as a world power, they were simultaneously colonizing Britain and taking over the Papacy. And that leads us on to, I believe that the Jesuit colonization of Britain was justified by the Grey Jesuit hierarchy, the highest families of the Jesuits, the Pallavicinis and whatnot, Colonnas, Torlonias, Orsinis, Medicis, Massimos, etc. They justified the Jesuit colonization by the fact of what occurred during the 1210s. Indeed, during the 1210s, beginning just before the 1210s, 1208, 1209, there was a problem with succession. The Pope Innocent III wished for Stephen Langford to become the Archbishop of Canterbury. He was the papal choice for Archbishop of Canterbury, and King John refused to allow this figure to become Archbishop of Canterbury, and thus the Pope wielded an interdict on Britain, not only on King John but also on the whole British people. And indeed, the Pope Innocent III excommunicated King John, and thus, to revive Britain, King John in in 1213 was forced to relinquish England, its lands, its population, and its holdings to the Pope. Thus, since 1213, Britain has been a fiefdom of the papacy. And indeed, 2 years afterwards, in 1215, King John ratified the Magna Carta that the British barons had created, and by doing this, he had broken the terms of the concessions he'd made to Pope Innocent III, and thus not only had he given to the papacy Britain, its population, its lands, and its holdings, he now forfeited the crown corporation, and the British monarchy, the British throne, to the papacy. And now, this act has never been repealed, and indeed America is also a papal vassal, a papal fief, because America is nothing but a corporation that grew out of the Virginia Company. It's a corporation, and it is also beholden to the acts of 1213 and 1215. And with the Jesuit takeover of the papacy in 1814, the Jesuits are now the papacy. Thus, Britain and America are no longer necessarily the fiefdoms of the Pope. They are the fiefdoms of the papacy, and I guess the Pope, the papal puppet. The popes have been puppets of the Jesuits since 1814, but the real power lies with the Jesuits. Thus, the Britain and America are fiefdoms of the Jesuit order, and this has been now going on for 800 years. We are literally the serfs of Rome, and this is not a very well-known fact. And indeed, the Jesuits, when they rose to prominence after their beginnings in 1534, after Borgia, a member of the Ultra-Aristocracy, had found them as Los Alumbrados, and decided he wanted them as the intelligence arm of the Ultra-Aristocracy, which at that time was beginning to come together, a variety of bloodlines, the Merovingians, Genoese, Venetians, and now it also includes the Sabbatean Frankists, the British peerage, and the Habsburg dynasty, and various other fellow travelers, which now represent the ultra-aristocracy that some like to call the Dragon Court. And indeed, they see themselves as an earthbound Anunnaki. But yes, when the Jesuits were formed, they not only became the intelligence arm of the Genoese and supported the Genoese interest in the Curia, which was effectively the far right of the Curia, whereas the liberals and the humanists made up the more what would be considered leftish elements of the Curia. But now the entire Curia is dominated by Jesuit puppets, as is the papacy and the Pope, and the higher echelons of the Cardinalate and the entire Vatican hierarchy are chosen by the Jesuits by way of the ultra-aristocracy. But first, their initial vow was to defend the Council of Trent, which took place not long after they had blossomed. The Jesuits had blossomed forth from 1545 to 1563, the Council in Trent. So the Jesuit oath was to continue the Council of Trent, continue the Counter-Reformation against the Protestant nations, liberals and heretics, and to bring the nations of Europe back to the throne of Rome. And by the time of the Congress of Vienna, and of course the Jesuit colonization of Britain had brought the Protestant King George III, elector now of the Holy Roman Empire, back to, effectively, even though he was Protestant, he was back within the Pope's hand. So they had brought the thrones of Europe back to the papacy by 1814, and thus had completed their oath. And not only that, they had become the papacy, as they were now more powerful than the Vatican itself. Indeed, the High Grey as they call them, Jesuit family Massimo, virtually own the entire Holy See. And of course the intelligence arm of the Jesuits acts out of the Pallavicini bloodline, which are intermarried with the Cecil bloodline, which means a link between certain elements of the ultra-aristocracy, for instance the Britanno-Norman peerage linked with the Jesuit oligarchy through the Pallavicini-Cecil marriage. And that took place very early in 1545, as they knew they needed to cement things. The Jesuit colonization of Britain had been planned even before the Jesuits were born of the Alumbrados. So with 1814 the Jesuits had completed their oath, and since 1814 the Jesuits have simply given their entire agenda over to attempting to achieve the one world government dominion, new world order, whatever you wish to call it, of the ultra-aristocracy. Indeed, the aim of the ultra-aristocracy is to create universal reductions. The Jesuits created the Paraguayan reductions during the 16th, 17th and 18th centuries in places such as Paraguay, where they enslaved the Guarani Indians, kept them high on coca leaf, wouldn't let them out the compound. And indeed it was a form of proto-communism, and indeed this is what they wish for the entire earth to be. We don't know whether these reductions will be agrarian or technocratic or a mix of the two. Indeed, what Pol Pot was attempting in Cambodia with his depopulationist ideals may be a blueprint for what may happen now, especially with the drive among the ultra-aristocracy for eugenics and depopulationism, which they also categorize in religious terms with the ideas of divine right. They managed to marry the two, both religious and scientific, so Ultra-Catholicism is now entwined with Ultra-Darwinism, as it were, and eugenics. So they now wish to depopulate the earth, and indeed the Jesuits are at the forefront of this thrust for the ultra-aristocracy, and they are keeping the Vatican as it is, not only as a ceremonial entity, but because of the links. Ultra-aristocracy needs ultra-feudalism, needs Ultra-Catholicism. In a sense, they all kind of need each other to be able to operate perfectly. And this is now coming into motion, and the depopulationist agenda is occurring very fast, and the hippie movement are being utilized as assets of the Jesuit order. Indeed, the New Age movement was created by a Jesuit called Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, S.J., and the New Age movement are nothing but the unwitting mouthpieces of the Malthusians. It's depopulationist, eugenicist and Malthusian propaganda pushed out by the New Age movement in the veil of environmentalism. I don't think the New Age movement realize that they're being used in such a nefarious manner, but they are supporting a very genocidal ideal, which is the agenda of the ultra-aristocracy. Indeed, the Papacy family, who have always been an ultra-Catholic family, who remained Catholic despite Britain's Protestantism for a couple of centuries, they are pretty much running what was Agenda 21, which is now Agenda 2030, which is a depopulationist agenda. And indeed, the dialectics in Europe, left and right, ethno-religious, are all being built up specifically for depopulation. And post-depopulation, whoever survives will then be enslaved in a universal Jesuit reductions. As I said, I don't know how technocratic these universal reductions can be, and indeed the ultra-Catholic elements, especially Gobineau, have supported scientific theories also, with his ideas of the aristocracy being the master race. So there is this link going on between sort of dark age primitive Catholic feudalism and technocracy, as both ideas wish for a dark age of ignorance, to keep the population completely stupid, thus they are completely controlled. The information that they will be given will be just as what was given to the Guarani Indians by the Jesuits. They dealt the mass in Latin, which they would never have been able to understand, and thus ignorance continues, and they can be completely enslaved as a herd. And this is what is going on now. It's slowly creeping in. We have a growing fascist police state, which nobody can deny the existence of. And what is so bizarre about this police state is that the hippies, the New Age hippies, are defending the police state as they are defending the agenda of those who run the police state, the Malthusians, the depopulationists, the eugenicists, those who follow the theories of Malthus, those who follow the theories of Gobineau, those who follow the theories of de Maistre, all ultra-aristocratic ideologies. And it's all coming out into the open. But the minute we anti-Jesuit scholars start speaking, everybody just dismisses us as cranks because they believe the Jesuits are this harmless Catholic order, which they are not. They were confessors to monarchs. They had control over monarchies because of the fact that they were the confessors of the monarchies. They could blackmail monarchies. They still control the world today. For instance, all US foreign policy is dictated from Georgetown University, Jesuit University. Indeed, there are tunnels leading from Georgetown University to the White House, where the Jesuit order meet up with the higher elements of the American governmental system and advise them on geopolitics, not only external but also internal. And indeed, the Jesuits have a monopoly over the entire Western intelligence groupings such as the CIA, MI6, Mossad, Saudi intelligence, etc. And it's all being spun. The entire web of destruction is being spun by the Jesuits because they are the active arm. They are the CIA of the ultra-aristocracy. They are the ones completing psychological operations in the world. All of the false flags are being carried out by the Jesuits, all their proxies. They create proxy armies in the Middle East, in various places, to destabilize regions, and they are an absolutely genius force. But back to the initial point, you cannot separate the Jesuits and the Illuminati, because the Illuminati were created by the Jesuits and they are part of the Jesuits. The Jesuits and the Illuminati are one and shall always be one. And not only that, they are entwined with the ultra-aristocracy. Thus, the ultra-aristocracy and the Jesuits will always be one. And the aim of the ultra-aristocracy will always be a feudal order. They do not believe in democracy or liberalism or anything. They believe that they are the master race, and indeed they are ethnically separate from the common stock due to selective breeding and genetic engineering and eugenics. The ultra-aristocracy are their own ethnic group, and they will dominate what they call the vulgars for eternity, it seems, unless we start getting this information out now. And the first hurdle is to get past the idea that everyone who is anti-Jesuit and believes that the Jesuits are the main force driving the New World Order are cranks. We first need to get past that stigma. Second, we need to stop people from believing that the Jesuits and the Illuminati are separate, because they are one and the same and always have been. I mean, the Illuminati was pretty much, it was the brainchild of Lorenzo Ricci, Jesuit Superior General, and Lord Shelburne, of a Jesuit dynasty, head of British intelligence, but from a Jesuit family. And the main figures were Giuseppe Balsamo, a very interesting, odd Masonic character, and Adam Weishaupt, who was a Jesuit professor of Jesuitical canon law at a Jesuit university in Ingolstadt in Bavaria. So There's just some clues. There's even more evidence to prove this, and this is simply the truth. That you cannot fight. And now, I'm going to fade out.